You've seen political debates get heated before, but not like this. Not where a single manila folder, slid across a polished studio table, had the power to shatter reputations, trigger nationwide outrage, and rip open a family secret so carefully hidden it was practically locked in a vault. The air inside Studio 4 that night wasn't just tense. It was electrified, like the seconds before a lightning strike. Millions sat at home, unaware they were seconds away from witnessing a moment that would detonate across headlines and dominate the public conversation for weeks. It was a Tuesday evening, prime time, and the cameras framed the shot with surgical precision. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to the left, Ivanka Trump to the right, and veteran host Colin Brandt sitting between them like a referee who didn't yet realize the fight he was about to oversee. The topic was harmless enough on paper, political families and ethics in American leadership, but the tone, even in the opening minutes, was anything but neutral. Every word carried an undertone. Every glance had weight. Jasmine's voice was calm, deliberate, almost surgical in its precision, as she spoke about the dangers of power becoming a family business. Ivanka, composed but with a tension behind her smile, countered with her family's decades of service and deep connections. They weren't here to agree. They were here to spar. And no one, not the audience, not the host, had any idea how personal it was about to get. The moment the conversation shifted to transparency, the ground beneath them cracked. Colin's question was simple. Did Jasmine believe all public figures were being honest with the American people? She didn't even glance at him. Instead, she locked her eyes on Ivanka and said slowly, deliberately, and not all of them, and some have more to hide than they'd like people to think. The air in the studio seemed to vanish. Ivanka tilted her head, smirking just enough to hide the tension building in her jaw. Is that directed at me? Jasmine didn't blink. Your family's history speaks for itself, but there are things the public hasn't heard yet. Things that frankly cross a line most Americans would never tolerate. The first murmur from the audience rolled like distant thunder, and then Jasmine's hand reached under the table, toward the folder. The cameras caught it perfectly. The way Jasmine's fingers slid that manila folder into the space between them, like placing a live grenade on the table. The lights reflected off its smooth surface, but it wasn't the folder itself that froze the room. It was what it represented. Evidence, allegations, allegations, allegations. The possibility that the conversation had just left the realm of political theater and entered something far more dangerous. Ivanka's smirk faltered for the first time. That's absurd, she said quickly, as if speed could drown out the weight of the moment. Have this as some stunt, I won't dignify it. Dignify it. Jetty. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, her words chosen like a surgeon's scalpel. This isn't a stunt. These are communications and testimonies from people who've worked closely with the Trump Organization. They paint a very different picture of your relationship with your father than the one you've been selling to the public. The words hung in the air like smoke from a match. Ivanka leaned forward, the polished elegance in her tone now fraying at the edges. That's disgusting. It's disgusting. You think throwing around salacious lies will make you relevant? This is politics at its ugliest. The audience had gone silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle of papers. To speak, even Colin, the host who had mastered the art of maintaining control, looked like he was deciding whether to step in or let the explosion run its course. Jasmine's reply was simple and all the more devastating for it. Call it whatever you want. But the American people have a right to know when their leader's judgment might be compromised. Personal relationships matter, especially when they influence decisions at the highest levels. For a moment, the mask slipped. A flicker, panic, irritation passed over Ivanka's face. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, perhaps realizing that this was no longer a conversation she could contain. The narrative was slipping away. Colin cleared his throat, his voice tighter now. Let's take a moment here. We're going to unpack this, but I do want to remind both of you, these are serious allegations, and our viewers deserve clarity. I agree, Jasmine said smoothly. Which is why I'm ready to go through these line by line if necessary. And that's when you knew this wasn't just a political disagreement. This was a chess game, and Jasmine Crockett had just placed her queen in striking distance of the king. Ivanka's posture shifted, subtle but telling. Subtle, subtle but telling. Her back was straighter now, her chin slightly raised, as if trying to reclaim the psychological high ground. This is beneath you, Congresswoman, she said, voice clipped. And beneath me, But no one in that room was thinking about dignity anymore. They were thinking about the folder. About the weight of whatever was inside it. About how far Jasmine Crockett was willing to go. Colin leaned back slightly, his eyes flicking between the two women like a referee who had just realized this wasn't a match. This was a war. Before we get to specifics, he began cautiously. Let's continue with the broader discussion. We owe the viewers a balanced conversation. Ivanka seized the opening, softening her tone. My family has been in the public eye for decades. We've endured every rumor, every political hit, job, imaginable, verteten, seed of tatatats. And yet I remain committed to doing work that matters for this country. She let the last words linger, her gaze sweeping the audience like a politician on the campaign trail. It was a practiced move, polish over pressure. But Jasmine didn't buy it. She waited for Ivanka to finish, then leaned in slightly, her voice steady and unyielding. You can be committed and still be held accountable, Ms. Trump. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. The air shifted again, the tension recoiling like a spring. Shoe-doiling. Colin moved them to questions about foreign investments and whether political dynasties could resist outside influence. It was an attempt to restore normalcy, but the weight of that folder, still untouched, sat in the middle of the table like a shadow neither woman could ignore. At one point, Ivanka leaned in toward Jasmine, her smile tight, her voice so low it was meant only for the microphones. You think you're going to score points here, but you're playing a dangerous game. Jasmine met her gaze without blinking. The truth isn't a game. Colin, oblivious to the private exchange, pressed Jasmine on systemic reform. She didn't hesitate. Transparency, campaign finance reform, and an end to nepotism. If you get a job in politics, it should be because you're qualified, not because your last name opens doors. Name opens doors. Ivanka's retort came with a sharpened edge. That's rich coming from someone who's never had to operate a global business under the media spotlight. It's easy to throw stones when you've never had to build anything. Oh, I've built my career without a safety net. Jasmine shot back. Jasmine shot back. There's value in knowing what it's like to start from nothing and still have to prove yourself every single day. The audience didn't clap. They didn't move. They were waiting for the folder to open. Colin finally leaned toward Jasmine, the curiosity in his voice betraying the calm facade he tried to maintain. Congresswoman, are you saying you have direct evidence that the American public hasn't seen before? Yes, Jasmine replied, without hesitation. Ivanka's hands tightened around the arms of her chair. Then let's see it. I'm not afraid of some cherry-picked nonsense. A patience, Jasmine said evenly. A context matters. If I present this without explaining why it's relevant, people will think it's gossip. This isn't gossip. It's about whether powerful people are making decisions that serve themselves over the country. Colin nodded, sensing the moment was building towards something irreversible. Oh, right. Give us the background first, nah? Jasmine leaned forward, her voice deliberate, as though she was laying the foundation of a case in a courtroom. She spoke of patterns she'd observed in Congress, decisions that mysteriously aligned with private business interests, loyalty to family outweighing loyalty to country, meetings that vanished from official records. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse without framing the picture. She was guiding the audience down a path step by step until they could no longer ignore the shape forming in front of them. Ivanka leaned back, arms crossed, the irritation no longer hidden. Well, you're making it sound like you've uncovered some deep conspiracy. People are tired of this, tearing each other down instead of building up the country. I'm not here to tear you down, Jasmine said, locking eyes with her. I'm here to hold you to the same standard any public servant should meet. If you've done nothing wrong, the evidence will speak for itself. If you have, the public deserves to know. The room seemed to contract around them, the air thickening with anticipation. Even Colin had gone quiet, letting the tension stretch like a wire about to snap. Jasmine's hand moved toward the folder again, resting on it without opening it. I've given you the courtesy of hearing the context. The next part will be the specifics. But once I open this, there's no going back. Ivanka's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to something between a dare and a warning. Do what you think you have to. The audience leaned forward as one, breathless. The cameras caught Jasmine's fingers tightening ever so slightly on the folder's edge. She wasn't just holding paper, she was holding the trigger. She was holding the trigger. Jasmine's hand moved with unhurried precision, her fingers sliding under the manila folder's flap. The sound of the clasp clicking open was faint, but in the silence of the studio, it might as well have been the crack of a gun. The gun. She pulled out the first sheet of paper, not a flimsy photocopy, but a thick, official-looking document bearing an unmistakable seal at the top. The camera zoomed in instinctively, though Jasmine kept it angled so only she could read it. "This," she began, her voice steady, "is from the Office of Government Ethics. It's a filing that should have been amended months ago, yet wasn't." Ivanka tilted her head, a polite smile pulling at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes betrayed something sharper. "And..." "People make clerical errors all the time. That doesn't prove anything." Jasmine didn't flinch. True, clerical errors happen, but when those errors hide the transfer of a $3, $2 million property to a holding company controlled by a family member, just days before a federal contract was awarded to a partner of that company. That's not clerical. That's deliberate. That's deliberate. The sound in the room shifted, a low murmur from the crew. Someone in the control booth audibly whispering, "Whoa." ITT. Ivanka's expression froze for a fraction too long before she laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that said she wanted to own the moment before it owned her. That's absurd. My business dealings are completely above board." Jasmine placed the document flat on the table, sliding it just close enough for Colin to glimpse the highlighted sections. His eyes darted over the text, and for the first time, his polished demeanor slipped at... He looked up at Ivanka, then back at Jasmine, as if silently asking if they were really going there. "We can fact-check this right now," Jasmine offered. "If the public record doesn't lie. Contracts are filed. Property transfers are logged. The timelines match. Exactly. And they point to a pattern, not a coincidence." Ivanka exhaled slowly, her voice now quieter, more measured. "Patterns can be made to say anything, Congresswoman. That's how politics works." Jasmine didn't blink. "No, Miss Trump. That's how corruption works." The statement hit the air like a slap. No shouting, no theatrics, just an unshakable accusation hanging between them. Colin shifted in his seat, sensing this was no longer just an interview. It was a live confrontation with stakes neither side could walk away from unchanged. Jasmine reached back into the folder, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though each step was calculated to let the tension simmer just long enough to make the next reveal hit harder. "This next one," she said, sliding out another document, "isn't about money. It's about money. It's about influence." The paper was thinner this time, an email printout. The header was unmistakable, a White House domain. A timestamp from 3 years prior glared at the top. "I got this through a FOIA request," Jasmine explained. "It's from a senior advisor, addressed to you directly, Ms. Trump." It outlines a meeting agenda with foreign trade delegates who, just hours after this meeting, signed a private investment deal with one of your apparel subsidiaries. Ivanka's smile tightened, but her chin lifted ever so slightly. "Oh, Congresswoman, you have no idea how many meetings I attended in my role. Trying to connect every one of them to my private life is..." Jasmine held up a finger, not to silence her, but to control the pace. "It's not about every meeting. It's about this one." The notes here, written by your aide, specifically reference personal opportunities and leveraging family brand recognition. That's not trade policy. That's profit-making, while sitting in a taxpayer-funded role. The air in the room shifted again, thicker now, the kind of atmosphere where everyone knew they were teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Colin cleared his throat, clearly wrestling with whether to intervene or let the drama unfold. His producer's voice was likely screaming in his ear. "Don't cut. Don't you dare cut." Ivanka leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped, knuckles pale. "You're implying corruption without proof." "That's dangerous, Congresswoman. Not just from me." She let her words hang. "But for you." A few people in the control booth exchanged sharp glances at that last line. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly, but it carried weight. Jasmine's voice stayed calm, unshaken. "I'm not implying anything. I'm not implying anything. I'm reading your aide's own words, and I'm doing it here, live, so no one can say it was buried in some closed-door committee where the truth goes to die." She slid the email toward the host. Colin glanced down at the bolded lines, and his eyebrows rose just enough to signal that, yes, this was exactly as damning as it sounded. The studio lights seemed hotter now, shadows deeper. Even Ivanka's polished composure was beginning to show hairline cracks. The The kind you only see up close before the whole thing splinters. Ivanka straightened in her chair, a subtle but unmistakable shift into offensive posture. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the kind of confident cadence honed over years of carefully managed interviews. "You know, Jasmine," she began, using the first name deliberately, "I've sat across from heads of state, CEOs, and world leaders. They've all asked me about American leadership, its strength, its stability. What you're doing here, this is not strength. It's a circus act for clicks and political points." Her eyes didn't waver. She was attempting to reframe the entire exchange, not as a factual confrontation, but as a spectacle she could rise above. It was a calculated move, and a dangerous one. Jasmine let the silence stretch for a beat, forcing Ivanka to sit in her own words. Then she leaned forward slightly, her tone still calm, but now with an edge that sliced through the studio air. "You want to talk about leadership?" she said. "A leadership is being accountable to the people who pay your salary." Leadership is standing on this stage and answering questions without hiding behind titles or family names. And leadership, Miss Trump, is not using your position in government to advance your personal empire. The word empire landed like a drop of ink in clear water, spreading through the audience's perception. A few in-studio spectators shifted in their seats. Ivanka opened her mouth, but Jasmine didn't give her the chance. "You say this is for clicks. Let me tell you something. This isn't for clicks. Let me tell you something. This isn't for clicks. This is for every small business owner who didn't have a White House pass to negotiate their deals. This is for every American worker who watched their wages stagnate while you entertained trade delegates over champagne and walked away with private contracts." A quiet misprate from somewhere in the audience slipped into the microphone pickup. The host didn't even flinch. This was gold for live television. Ivanka's eyes narrowed just slightly. "You're making accusations you can't prove, and one day you might regret it." Jasmine didn't blink. "The difference between us, Miss Trump, is that I don't say things I can't back up. And if you think this is the end of what I have..." She tapped the folder gently. "You're very, 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 very wrong." The camera panned briefly to the host, whose lips were pressed together as if he were physically holding back a grin. This was no longer an interview. It was a chess match, and Jasmine had just sacrificed a pawn to line up her queen. Jasmine reached for the folder, not hurried, not theatrical, but with the measured control of someone who knew the exact weight of the next move. The paper made the faintest whisper as she slid a single sheet free. "I've been careful tonight," she began, eyes locked on Ivanka. "Ivanka. Because some of what I have is sensitive, but since you've decided to paint this as a game, let's stop playing." She turned the paper toward the host first, letting his brows lift before the audience could see. Then she placed it on the table, angled so the camera could catch it without giving away the full details, just enough to flash the unmistakable header. "Office of the Inspector General, Investigation, Summary." Ivanka's expression didn't change immediately, but there was the slightest tightening at the jaw. "This," Jasmine said, tapping the document lightly, "is an internal review into a meeting held at the Treasury Annex during your father's administration. You were there. No, so was a foreign delegation. And according to this report, signed off by multiple agencies, terms were discussed that had nothing to do with public policy and everything to do with private holdings." A rustle moved through the studio audience, like wind through dry leaves. Ivanka leaned back, folding her arms. "So you have no idea what you're talking about. That's classified material, and even showing it is perfectly legal." Jasmine cut in smoothly, because this page is now part of the public record, unredacted, filed just last month. She let the words hang, then added, "I didn't bring it here to threaten you, Miss Trump. I brought it here so the people watching, voters, taxpayers, citizens, can see what leadership really looked like in those rooms." The host glanced at the control room, where producers were probably mouthing frantic instructions about camera angles and zoom levels. Live TV had rules, but none that could gauge this moment. Ivanka's fingers drummed lightly on the table, the only sign she was recalculating. "You don't know the full story. You have one piece of paper and a lot of ambition." Jasmine's smile was almost imperceptible. "You're right. I do have ambition. Ambition to make sure no one, no matter how wealthy, how connected, how protected, gets to rewrite history to suit themselves." And somewhere in the back of the studio, a chair creaked. The tension had reached that level where even small sounds became thunder. This was the point where viewers at home would lean forward, forgetting their coffee, forgetting their phones. Ooh, they weren't just watching a conversation anymore. They were witnessing the slow, deliberate turning of a lock on a door that had been sealed for years, and Jasmine was about to open it. But on the 9th day, something happened that none of the officials, nor even I, Jive, could have predicted. As the sun rose over the glassy surface of the lake, I stood at my dock with a coffee in hand, watching a thin line of mist curl upward like smoke from a dying fire. The air was cool, almost unnaturally still, as if the world itself had paused to take a breath. That's when the first faint trickle began, a subtle, barely perceptible draw in the water, like the tug of an unseen hand. I felt it before I saw it, and in that instant, I knew nature had made her decision. The floodwaters from last night's storm, coupled with the drainage channels I had meticulously cleared on my own land, had set the stage for what came next. The lake, swollen beyond capacity, began to find every possible escape route. It started slowly, seeping into channels long forgotten by the HOAA's engineers, old creek beds and hidden underground streams that they had arrogantly paved over to build their precious lakefront boardwalks and condo foundations. Within an hour, the gentle draw turned into a steady current, and by midday, the water's retreat was undeniable. Residents started to notice. First came the curious stares from their balconies, then the frantic calls to the HOA president. Trucks and vans rolled in, men in reflective vests carrying clipboards and shouting into radios. They ran along the shore like ants protecting a crumbling mound, placing sandbags in desperate, haphazard lines, trying to redirect a force they didn't understand. I stayed exactly where I was, leaning on my railing, sipping coffee, and letting the events unfold. They had spent months dismissing my warnings, threatening me with fines, mocking my obsession with water rights. With water rights. Now they were about to learn that the lake they thought they controlled had never truly belonged to them. It belonged to the land, and by extension, to me. By evening, the damage was irreversible.